So today's topic is politics and the economy, and I get a lot of feedback from students that this is not the most exciting of the topics. So what I want to do is relate it very much to you as an American citizen. Politics is the way in which we decide how we want to run our world, or our society at least. And politics in the United States is particularly interesting, that ours is one of the forms of government in which the idea is to reduce the level of violence and conflict, particularly upon transmitting power from one regime to the other. And we actually do that rather well. The United States has a fairly good track record of not starting wars between presidents, at the very least. So what type of government do we have? If you were to explain to someone who comes from a different culture what government we have, what would you say? A lot of us would say that we are democratic, that we have a democratic government, and that's not altogether accurate. The truth is, we don't have a true democracy. In order for us to have a true democracy, every single one of us, every single person who's considered a person, would have to be able to vote to make decisions on every single thing that would impact how our society runs. And that's not actually how we do things. That would take a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we'd have to be very well informed about how we run our very complex society. Instead, we run what's called a representative democracy. That means that we elect people to make the majority of those decisions for us. Now, the way in which we elect people is very interesting in our country. In our country, we culturally have what's called voter apathy. That is, we have a very low turnout of people who can vote and make decisions in our elections. Other countries have incredibly higher turnouts, if not 100% turnouts, than very close. Some people are willing to die in order to go vote. And the majority of our culture, in a non-presidential election, we're lucky if we get a 10% turnout. It's usually in the single digits. In a presidential election, we get higher than that. We get closer to about half, but that's still fairly low for any type of a democratic society. In fact, there was a study that came out of the UK in the past few years that said that we don't actually run like a democracy or a representative democracy, any type of democracy. We run more like an oligarchy. And rather than defining that for you, I'm going to challenge you to look that word up. What is an oligarchy? Because it's very much the antithesis of the intention of a democracy. We run our country, for the past few decades anyway, like an oligarchy. Now, once you've gone and you've looked that up, I'm going to spend some more time talking about perhaps why that's come about. One way in which we structure our government is around a concept called parties. We all know what parties are. This is called partisan politics. We're well aware of two parties in our country, the Republicans and the Democrats. The truth is, we run a polypartisan society. That is, we should have many parties. There should be no number on the number of parties that our country can run on. In practice, we run as a bipartisan political system. That is, there's two major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, currently. There have been all sorts of different parties in the past, and there's actually currently many parties. There's the Libertarians, the Green Party, the Rainbow Party. I don't know if there's still Whigs, but at least there used to be, the Federalists. Right now, according to the way in which we structure campaign and access to information, we run as a polypartisan society, and that places the power and takes it and puts it very polarized. That we have two different parties that share the power, and you don't hear from a lot of other voices. That's not exactly how we were made to run, actually. We were made to run in a pluralistic way. Pluralism is this concept, in democracy in particular, in allowing many different voices, plural of voices, to have their say. And that way, power is equally, or as equally as possibly, distributed among many different voices. Instead, we have mostly two. In fact, George Washington, in his farewell speech, as he was leaving the presidency, warned against partisan politics. He was very much not in favor. He said that partisan politics would be the ruin of our country, which is interesting. Now, partisan politics, a lot of us don't even really understand. A lot of us have allegiance, which is playing on a psychological affect of humanity, that we become allegiant to a cause without even particularly understanding it, especially if that cause is given to us in a very emotional way. What is a political party really? Can you even come up with the answer to that question? What's its purpose? What does it do? A political party rallies a group of people around a political philosophy. And in fact, the political parties, the way they are right now, haven't always been loyal to the philosophy that they're loyal to. Republicans and Democrats flipped. They used to be one way, and now they're another way. In fact, back in Lincoln's time, they were completely opposite from one another. So if you ever watch that movie, which I highly recommend, the new movie about Abraham Lincoln called Lincoln, and you hear them talking about the Democrats and the Republicans, you have to actually flip the labels for it to make any sense. That Democrats acted like Republicans and Republicans acted like Democrats at that time. What does that mean? Philosophically, they were different. The philosophies that drive political parties are liberalism and conservatism. Currently, Republicans are more conservative and Democrats are more liberal. That doesn't even mean that they are the most conservative or the most liberal parties there are. If you think of the philosophies, political philosophies, they run on a spectrum. And you have conservative at one end and liberal at the other end. And there are parties that are much more liberal and conservative than Democrats and Republicans. Philosophically, the average voter in the United States is at neither end. The average voter is what's called politically moderate, that they are somewhere in the middle. They believe some ideas from liberals and some ideas from conservatives make some sense, and they would like the country to be run that way. Currently, and over the last few decades, the political parties have been acting more and more polarized according to those philosophies. So then the question becomes, what does liberal and conservative mean? There's a lot of euphemisms and overgeneralizations and misinformation actually out there about conservatives and liberals. There's a lot of nasty talk and there's a lot of overhyped positive talk. There's a lot of unfortunate plays on people's emotion around politics rather than people just being objectively informed. If you look objectively at any political philosophy, there tends to be two prongs to how a philosophy operates. A philosophy is just a way in which the group believes that society should be run. One prong is how they believe the economy should be run. And the other prong is how they believe social policy should be run. That is, how should the market go? How should we work our money and our resources? And how should people behave and act? What should our laws be around those things? How do we take care of our people? How do we punish our people over here? Liberals and conservatives have fairly opposing viewpoints on these things. In order to understand social policy, you have to understand economic policy first, and this is where the economy comes in. There's two modern concepts to how economies should be run: capitalism and socialism. And because this isn't an economics class, I'm only going to give you a really brief overview. They too are run in fairly opposite ways. And the United States is neither one nor the other exclusively. They're kind of a hybrid of both, and they have been for a long time. Or we have been for a long time. Capitalism and socialism both rely on three tenets, that is, three major rules. In capitalism, the first rule is private ownership of the means of production. That means that private citizens can own the means of production, business. Private citizens own business. In socialism, the first rule is public ownership of the means of production. This is a little bit more complicated to understand. Public ownership, especially in a democratic society, is ownership by everybody. So the closest thing to come to is the idea of a public library or a public park. Who owns these things? Some people would say it's the government. It's not actually accurate unless you understand that the government is us, all of us, that public ownership is paid for and funded by the taxpayer, and the decisions are made by either our own direct voting decisions or the decisions made by those people we directly elected. So public ownership is managed by the government but owned by the taxpayer. So in a socialized economy, businesses are publicly owned by the taxpayers. The second tenet of capitalism is free market. That is, there are no rules to how these private businesses should run. This is how we're not truly capitalistic. A free market would have no regulations on how anything was to happen in business. So, for example, if you wanted to sell arsenic-encrusted cookies, you could. You could bake the cookies, market the cookies, bring them to your college campus, sell them out of your cart, price them any way you want, bake them anywhere you want with any ingredients, put the arsenic on them, and probably the only reason why you would fail is you'd kill all your customers. But no government entity, no entity at all, could regulate how you were making those cookies. Now, in our economy, there's regulations. You have to have, well, certainly you can't have arsenic, but you have to have safe ingredients, and you have to have a sanitary kitchen, and you have to apply for licenses, etc., etc. That's why we're not entirely a free market. In a socialized economy, the second rule is not free market. The second rule is actually planned production, centralized production, that the people decide not only can you not sell arsenic-encrusted cookies, but you have to apply for whether or not we want cookies at all, and maybe we don't want cookies in the center of the campus, and certainly not chocolate chip cookies. We need oatmeal cookies, and we need them over there. Centralized planning. The third tenet of capitalism is profit. That these private businesses that are not regulated by anybody, the primary manifest function of any of these organizations is to make profit, and profit is any money that you make above and beyond the cost of production. In a socialized economy, the third tenet is not profit. The third tenet is distribution of profit. Because everybody owns it, everybody gets the profit. You see some of this in organizations like some insurance organizations that you can buy into get a distribution of profit to everybody, that everybody's considered a shareholder if you're purchasing this type of insurance. We have a few organizations like that in our country. So, how does this type of economy overlay back onto politics? There are pros and cons of both capitalism and socialism. In capitalism, a lot of the pros that people are very positive about is that it encourages hard work and entrepreneurship and creativity. Some of the cons, especially in a truly free market capitalized economy, is that you don't have as much safety. Nobody's regulating the products or the work environment or the type of chemicals that are going into the environment and surrounding areas. Particularly, and additionally, in a capitalized economy, there's an issue with what we consider vulnerable populations, those people who are unable to work, the elderly, the sick, the disabled, children. That there are no programs in a truly capitalistic economy because there's no taxes to help pay for any of these people. And so if you can't work hard, you're kind of in trouble. Social Darwinism. For socialism, a lot of the criticism is that it decreases that creativity and hard work and entrepreneurship. And if you remember Protestant work ethic from earlier chapters, this is why we're not particularly positive as a culture around socialism. That we believe that hard work is very moral. It is It is God shining his face down upon you. It is a sign that you're going to go to heaven. And so if you're not working hard, culturally, we don't consider you a very good person. The positives of socialism is that you do have an abundance of safety. You have lots of rules. You have lots of safety nets in place for vulnerable populations. Now, let's take these pros and cons and concepts and overlay them over politics and those two prongs. When you look at conservatism and you look at liberals, the conservatives believe more in a capitalized economy, that we should have free market, that we should have profit, that we should have private business. When they say things like they don't want large government, that is, they don't want all the rules that come around decreasing a free market. Now, when you look at liberals, they like a more socialized economy. They like what's called that big government because they want more of the rules over here. Now, how they choose their social politics over here has everything to do with how they've chosen to do their economic policies and the negatives of those things. So the negative for conservatives, the negative of a capitalized economy, is that you don't have as much safety and you have difficulty with vulnerable populations. And you see in a lot of conservative, not just our conservative politics, but in any society that takes up conservative politics, you have a flavor of whatever the mainstream religion is influencing social policy, because pragmatically this would hopefully offset the negatives of running a capitalized economy, that people would be more likely, if they embraced the moral tenets of their religion, to be giving to vulnerable populations of their own sense of moral obligation, that they would not sell arsenic-encrusted cookies because it would be against them morally. Now, what happens to social policy because of this is that you end up with laws that are religiously informed. In our country, you see laws that are regulating reproduction and family that look very spiritually informed. Now, on the other side, liberal social policy is to try and offset that lack of creativity that you have in a very highly regulated economy. So the social policy that liberals like to embrace are those that are termed social justice, equality, freedom of expression, that you can have your creativity in the social area, that you can express yourself and structure yourself and behave as equally and freely as possible. There's not going to be a lot of regulations there because there are a lot of regulations on the market. So hopefully that's a little bit more of an understanding of how our politics work. In order for our society to work, we all have to be informed and we all have to be proactive. And hopefully we can combat some of that voter apathy. When people are polled of why they're so apathetic, a lot of them say it's because they feel very lied to. And that might actually go back to us running like an oligarchy, which again, I challenge you to look that up. But it also might go back to the fact that we just don't understand how our system runs. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So now when you think about liberals and conservatives, I want you to think about the politics of economies and social policy and how that informs the parties that are running under these philosophies.